Welcome on Texas football. Good morning, everyone. It's time for rapid reactions. I hope you guys got a good night's sleep. It's time to talk a little football last night. A lot going on throughout the day as well. CJ and Jerry, I tell you what, let's start with the Aggie game. Getting beat, they go off and they start slow, and then they come back and go up 20-17, and then I tell you what, South Carolina scores 27 unanswered points, stymies a Texas A&M offense that had looked pretty stout in the first half, and really got after him and was able to run the ball against the Aggies too, a team that hadn't given that much on the ground all year long.
Yeah, no, I think, look, QB run game is big, right? I mean, and that's when we just get down to the end of the month and you talk about how A&M matches up with Texas. You have to look more like at LSU, not South Carolina, because that's a QB run game, and that's totally different. The guy that can evade rush like it's his job. As far as the Texas game, the most interesting thing that will come out of this game is what's the status of Le'Veon Moss.
Oh, he's be gone. Yeah.
Well, Mike Elko said in the press conference last night that it's not as bad as it looked. So we'll see. I mean, does that mean he's back for November 30th? I don't know. Probably not, but we'll see. I had two thoughts outside the game, though, guys, is a $250,000 fine for rushing the field to beat A&M, and you tore up your hedges. So that's most like $350,000. And seeing – Shane Beamer was celebrating like he won the Super Bowl. I mean, he's 5-3. I don't understand. Like, he was hugging his kid. His kid was on the field like 3 minutes ago. I was like, what are we doing here? You're like 3-3 in the SEC. Then my third thing was I saw Frank Beamer there supporting his son Shane. And my overwhelm, the thought that kind of came over me was we've come a long way in college football from 0-0 against Wake Forest going to overtime, and Frank Beamer's like this. The points are scored in every game now.
I will say this. I mean, a lot of football to be played. A&M got beat Saturday night, no doubt about it. I'll tell you another one that was closer than we expected, guys, throughout, and that was Florida-Georgia. Florida, Texas's next opponent, CJ. They hung tough with the Bulldogs, but it looks like they may have lost Derek Lagway or DJ Lagway for a long period of time. They're very talented freshman quarterback out of Willis, Texas, went down in the first half when Florida had Georgia on the ropes.
If Florida had a lot of momentum in that game, the time of that injury, you were looking at it in the sense that Florida might be the one in pure control of that football game in Jacksonville Saturday afternoon. But, it's unfortunate because I think Lagway was coming into his own. He was finding some sort of rhythm. He was making plays against Georgia, in which we obviously saw it not too long ago. That's a tough thing to do for a young quarterback against a Georgia defense that flies around. Now Florida's depending on their third-string quarterback, a Yale transfer. That feels like who Texas will face, right? You need a hamstring. That's not a quick thing to overcome if you're a quarterback. So I would anticipate seeing a third-string quarterback that transferred in from Yale quarterbacking for the Florida Gators next weekend against Texas. What does that team look like? Because that's a tough game. Florida and Georgia, both teams had players on the field basically banged up after every single snap. You don't have your quarterback anymore, and you had a number of guys that were beat up in that game. What does Florida look like coming in to Austin next week? I would imagine it's one with a lot of bumps, a lot of scrapes, a lot of bruises, one that doesn't want another physical game. And Texas coming off the bye week, that favors the Longhorns tremendously in my eyes.
Yeah, Florida's injury report's going to be extensive.
It's going to be long.
Extensive. They had multiple DBs go down. One of them looked like it could have been a hamstring. We'll have to see because they took him back to the locker room. I don't think he came back. That's going to be interesting. That's a good match. I think Florida's a good matchup for Texas, by the way, because maybe Florida gets the linebackers through the A-gaps, but they don't have front four big-time pass rush. I mean, anytime a 450-pounder on the field, you're not going to have pass rush, right? So I think it's a really good matchup for Texas. And by the way, the Warner, the kid who came in, doesn't have a strong arm.
He has to really rear back if he wants to get some.
Yeah.
I agree, Jerry.
That's a good matchup for Texas.
Yeah, it really is, because it's an offense that becomes all of a sudden one-dimensional, and Texas has really handled one-dimensional offenses fairly well all season long. I will add this about that Florida game. Their running back, they have a freshman running back that is really, really talented. They have a good run-blocking offensive line. And Carson Beck, you can say what you want, but he keeps throwing interceptions to the other team. They're going to lose a game if he keeps throwing 3 picks a game.
Yes, we talked about this after the Texas-Georgia game. If he keeps playing like that, they're going to get tripped up. And he was terrible. He was arguably the worst quarterback in the SEC right now. I know that sounds, people will be like, what about Auburn's guys? I don't care. He's thrown 11 interceptions in the last 4 or 5 SEC games. He has more interceptions than touchdowns in SEC play. I mean, that you're the bottom of the quarterback barrel at that point. And it's not a guarantee, but to your point, Bobby, if he plays like that at Ole Miss next week, they probably lose.
Yeah.
Well, it's time to talk about Ole Miss next. I mean, because they took the hammer to Arkansas in Fayetteville. That was not a good look for Sam Pittman, who's trying to keep his job right now. Jackson Dart, Ole Miss quarterback, passed for 515 yards, completing 25 passes overall, 5 touchdowns to a single receiver who had 254 yards. Look, I mean, I thought that Arkansas's defense might be okay. They're not against the pass. They looked really, really bad. Arkansas also was dealing with a backup quarterback issue as well. Taylon Green, the one that transferred from Boise State early or last year, got injured again, has a knee problem, it looks like. In comes the young man from Georgia. He did a good job, I thought, Singleton, of leading Arkansas down the field. But look, I mean, not only did Florida lose its quarterback, Arkansas certainly has an issue at quarterback right now with a guy staying healthy. And Kentucky didn't finish the game with theirs against Tennessee when they lost there. What did y'all think of the Arkansas game? Because I was switching back and forth between that game and another. But the Arkansas-Ole Miss game. Anybody, either of you guys want to take that one?
I got one thing. You can't run a 6'6", 195-pound quarterback 15 times in a game in the SEC and keep the guy healthy.
Yeah.
He got hurt against Tennessee. I mean, he's 6'6", 190, 195, and they're running him 15, 16, 17 times a game, or they want to, or he plays that style. You can't stay healthy in the SEC doing that. Texas, Arkansas was saving up for Texas. They didn't even play Jaquindon Jackson. I think they're really, Sam Pittman knows the Texas game may be everything for him since he's already got 5 wins. But Taylon Green, you can't keep a 6'6", 195-pound quarterback healthy running him that much. No chance in the SEC.
Texas should beat Arkansas. There's no doubt in my brain about that, right? They should beat them. They're more talented.
Good.
Right. That's the thing there. The thing that kind of gives me a little bit of optimism about Texas A&M, because I do think that's going to be a much tougher game. The skill set of what we're seeing from both Arkansas quarterbacks fits that of what Marcel Reed brings to the Texas A&M offense right now. They're able to run the football. They have designed quarterback runs. They get outside the pocket. You want them to throw the football. That's kind of where I'm at right now with Arkansas. Sit back, contain, force them to throw the football, because you have athletic enough, talented enough defensive backs right now that can stick with whoever. And I'm as big an Andrew Armstrong fan that you will find in the entire country. That kid is legitimate at Arkansas right now, the wide receiver number 2. If you haven't watched him this season, that guy can go. But with that said, you want those Arkansas quarterbacks to throw the football, and you want that Texas A&M quarterback, Marcel Reed, to throw the football as well. It's going to be a great kind of trial and error for the Longhorns to get their feet wet against a similar offense in that regard before that end of the game or end of the season matchup in College Station, November 30th.
The other thing, Bobby, it'll be interesting to see how Sark attacks Arkansas, because Lane Kiffin was like 2 deep, 3 deep. I don't care. I'm still going deep.
There's a lot of 3 deep.
Yeah. He was like 3 deep. I don't care. I'm going to run it down the vertical down the sideline.
And they were all open, Jerry. Every one of them.
Yep. So it'll be interesting to see how Sark attacks Arkansas versus how Lane Kiffin did with Jackson Dart.
I look at it, guys, and the Longhorns are going to be favored in the next 3 games.
Yep.
Period. Full stop. Will they be favored going into Kyle Field? I think it'll depend on how both A&M and Texas play the next 3 games. Kentucky, by the way, before we get out of talking about the SEC, 28-18 losers in Knoxville. Again, Vandegrift, the quarterback, did not finish that game for them. Tennessee is one of the 5 teams now. CJ, if you don't mind bringing that up for me, 5 teams in the SEC with 1 loss right now in conference. You see Georgia atop the league now at 5-1, A&M at 5-1, Tennessee at 4-1, Texas and LSU both at 3-1. The Tigers and Longhorns, as well as Alabama, all on the weekend. So those 3 teams had byes. All right, before we go any further, I want to say thank you to one of our sponsors. That sponsor is Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. Adam and his group have been helping injured Texans for more than 2 decades now. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, make sure you give Adam and his firm a chance to earn your business. Visit them at loweylawfirm.com. Guys, what do y'all think? What do y'all make of the SEC right now? I mean, Georgia has to go to Ole Miss next week. Texas hosts Florida. That's an 11 o'clock game, by the way, if you're unaware. So make your plans early for Texas next week. It'll be on ABC. What are y'all's thoughts on the SEC overall?
Alabama's at LSU, so you're going to have some knockout games next week. You have some real knockout games. Ole Miss hosting Georgia. If Georgia beats Ole Miss, they're out of the playoff hunt. Everything. Ole Miss has to win out. As far as the SEC race, it gets interesting. Tennessee's sitting there with 1 loss. They should beat Mississippi State next week, so they should go because that's a home game, and Mississippi State's terrible. Kids are decommitting during the game, apparently. So Tennessee then goes to Georgia with 1 loss. That would be Georgia's last SEC game because they have Ole Miss and Tennessee at home. Then they're done because they're done with SEC play. Then they have UMass, UMass and Georgia Tech. So they're done in 2 weeks. They get to sit home. A&M has New Mexico State off week. New Mexico State and at Auburn. But LSU's got a favorable schedule down the stretch because they have 3 home games in Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. They have a pretty good schedule down the stretch. So it's going to be interesting how it plays out with the A&M loss now. Look, Georgia's in the driver's seat, but what's the driver's seat when your quarterback's maybe playing the worst ball in the SEC?
I will say this, to talk about playing the worst ball, Diego Pavia against Auburn on Saturday was 9 of 22. And guess what? They still won the football game.
Yeah.
And they won it by double digits.
Yep.
That's how bad Auburn is playing right now. One of the teams that A&M has left on its schedule. But look, Vandy won. Oklahoma guys beat up on a overmatched Maine team. And I know they ran for a bunch of yards, 300 plus, CJ, is that right?
About 380. Yep.
Yeah. It was still 7-7 at the end of the first quarter.
Yeah. It was not pretty for the Sooners for a little bit, but it ended up that way. All right, I want to take all of that and think about this now. Where Texas, let's step away from the SEC and talk about where Texas fits right now as it relates to college football playoff. Some things are happening in the Big 12 and the ACC, I think, that are going to affect teams in the Big 10 and SEC getting more teams in.
Yes.
With Texas Tech beating Iowa State,
Big.
I don't think there's any way the Big 10 or the Big 12 gets more than 1 team in the college football playoff. Y'all agree with that summation? Yeah. I mean, who else? Oh, Kansas State loses to Houston.
Yeah.
I think that's one. Number 2, Clemson losing to Louisville gives Clemson 2 losses, including one by 20-something points or 30 points to a Georgia team. You look at that, and only Miami is unscathed in the ACC right now. Maybe Notre Dame gets in, but even though they're not really an ACC team, maybe they get in. So that might be one ACC team, 1 Big 12 team, and Notre Dame. Then you have 1 at-large. Well, we got to figure out who that at-large conference winner is. That would be 4. How many teams are going to get in from the Big Ten and the SEC?
I think the one key thing for me is, one, congrats to Dabo on portaling to the Gator Bowl today. But the other thing is, if SMU, one-loss SMU beats undefeated Miami in the ACC championship game, they will get 2 in, even though Miami shouldn't be in.
Right.
Because Miami's good. If Miami wins out, they're going to be the worst 12-0 team I've ever seen in a Power 4 conference. They're terrible on defense. Cam Ward will still turn the ball over. But that's my thought. If SMU runs the table and beats an undefeated Miami in the ACC will get 2 in.
It's all about bid stealers, and that's a hot topic in college basketball when you're talking about bracketology and filling the field of 68. Bid stealers are big because, to Jerry's point, what happens if SMU does win the ACC? What happens if Indiana goes out and loses the Ohio State, and you're sitting there with 4 teams in the Big Ten that are 11-1 at the end of the year, right? That's you can't leave them all out. And what's the case there for their resume versus that of Texas, right? And that's kind of where my thought has gone over the last 24 hours or so. If Texas does not go to Texas A&M and win that game, you're sitting at 10-2 in the regular season. What's your resume look like compared to other teams with similar or even better records? I think that's a fair conversation. You don't have a marquee win, not with the way in which Michigan's kind of turned out this year. Oklahoma's turned out this year. Is your best win right now Vanderbilt? Probably. But that doesn't compare to that of an 11-1 Indiana, 11-1 Ohio State. Some of these teams that have gone out and won big-time games, and that's no fault of Texas because they've won big games or games in which they're expected to win big, right? A lot of these games are 20 and 30-point, 40-point deficits. But when it comes down to it, and this is, of course, is all dependent upon what Texas does in College Station. What does that record and that resume look like at the end of the season? It's a much tighter race than I anticipated coming into the year, that without a doubt.
What gets interesting?
Texas wins out. I got to say this. Texas wins out the regular season. Texas is in.
Yeah, they're fine.
I'm not worried about that. I'm saying, can a 2-loss Texas get in? Because I'm looking at the Big Ten. Okay. Ohio State, Penn State. Okay. Penn State choked again on Saturday in a bad way. I mean, on the goal line, on the 3-yard line, 4 chances, just in a horrible play call on 4th down, by the way. And then you look at Indiana, undefeated, but they've got Ohio State next, I believe. Oregon, the other no loss or 1-loss team. Oregon, obviously, on their way, it looks like, to the playoff. Those 4 teams, Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon, all have a chance. Yes. They're going to beat one another a little bit here. Ohio State and Indiana might knock one or the other out. Right now, there's only 3 1-loss SEC teams across the board. Now, A&M and LSU both have 1 loss in conference, but they've got non-conference losses. Aggies lost to Notre Dame. LSU lost to USC. So you're looking at LSU being at the best, being able to finish 10-2. A&M the best 10-2. Only Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas, I think, truly control their own destiny here right now. The rest have to have some other things happen, including A&M, by the way. I don't think A&M is necessarily in with a 10-2 record after losing by 24 points on the road. It just doesn't work that way. All right, guys, what do y'all think about Texas's chances? Because I see all these models saying Texas has a 65% chance. Texas has to go out and take care of business the next 3 weeks and then play for the marbles at College Station.
Well, the whole key is how many 10-2 teams are there in the SEC? So if Texas is 10-2 and loses at A&M, A&M's got an argument, right? Because it goes back to what CJ said: who are Texas's wins at that point? What if Tennessee is sitting there at 10-2 and one of their losses is at Georgia? I mean, is Texas more deserving than Tennessee? What if LSU wins out? If they win out because they have a favorable schedule, say they beat Alabama, win at Florida, beat Vanderbilt, and beat Oklahoma, and they're sitting there 10-2. What could hurt them is USC's terrible. But other than that, they lost at A&M, and that would mean Texas also lost at A&M in that scenario. So if there's 4 10-2 teams at the end of the day in the SEC, is it a lock Texas gets in? I don't know if A&M's one of those 10-2s because they won the game.
Yep.
That's where it gets interesting for me.
Here's what's going to help them, and this is the immediate future for Texas here is kind of what's it called? You call it the just watching the game, the eye test. You know, you see what Texas can do. And in a sense, early in the year, Texas was winning the eye test, and that's what helped propel them to the number one team in the country.
Yes.
The eye test has disappeared for Texas. But we talked about it at the onset of the show. Taylon Green's dinged up. Now you're looking at maybe a situation where you don't have a DJ Lagway for Florida. What's going on with Kentucky and their quarterbacks? There's quarterback issues for the three immediate teams on the Texas schedule that could very easily sway their eye test back in favor of the Longhorns, where that was, again, over the last 3 weeks, that was a big issue for Texas. You know, that they beat Vanderbilt, but it was a 3-point game. They looked horrible against Georgia. Oklahoma wasn't much better. These next 3 weeks leading up to Texas A&M, that could sway that eye test, that reputation, everything around Texas back in their favor because they got health at quarterback and they got an offensive line that hopefully will get back to the point that they were at earlier in the year.
Here's the question, Bobby and CJ. If Texas is 10-1 and loses at A&M and is 10-2, and A&M wins at Auburn and they beat Texas and they're 10-2, and Tennessee wins at Vanderbilt the last game of the regular season to go 10-2, which two teams of those three get in?
I think it's going to depend on the scores. And to CJ's point, eye test. That's what's going to happen.
Because I can guarantee this: if A&M and Texas have the same record at 10-2, and A&M wins the game and Texas gets in,
it's going to be they'll be out of the SEC by the next week. They'll be headed to the Big Ten or ACC, wherever they get preferred treatment, probably. All right. I get it. I get it, guys. I will say this. One of the fallouts, and this is a rapid reaction show, is that there are no real great teams in college football right now outside of maybe, and I'm going to say this, maybe Oregon's a great team. Maybe. But Georgia has quarterback problems. We've seen teams that look really good go down and just not play well at times. So I'm in the scenario right now. Ohio State on Saturday did not look great at times. Now they won, but they didn't look great.
Bobby, can I ask you? Do you think that's the result of the portal? More parity across college 100%. Football? Because I was having this conversation earlier. There's not a dominant team. Oregon's good. They're not dominant. I wouldn't expect Oregon to go out there and beat anybody in the country. You know, you expected that probably with previous Alabama teams, Georgia teams as well. Right now, everybody feels beatable in a way, and I think that's a result of talent being dispersed across almost everybody in the country.
I think that's why you want to get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Because you get in, anybody can win it.
You got a shot.
Exactly what you just said. And I go back to something else, asking if it's the portal. Hell yes, it's the portal.
Yeah.
Portal is giving more teams a chance because of the quarterback position.
Vanderbilt.
Indiana, you can say what you want about Kirk Cignetti being a great coach and I win and all that stuff. They've got a quarterback. Vanderbilt has a quarterback. That's the great equalizer in football and in college football.
I think it goes beyond that, though. I don't think you're going to see great teams in college football anymore. And I've been saying this for a long time because even though people say, oh, Texas has depth, Georgia has depth, Georgia doesn't have the depth they used to have. You're not going to keep all these guys, and these teams aren't going to stay together for 3 years anymore. So your build-up to have great teams isn't there anymore. It's just not going to happen. But even we talk about all the depth all these teams have. They have good depth, but they don't have the depth. Georgia doesn't have the depth they had in 21 and 22. Not even close. So, I just don't see any of these teams. I don't see there being great dynastic runs in college football again because it's harder to win a title and the portal changed the game. You're just not going to – you can't keep your depth. You can't keep 3 scholarship quarterbacks anymore.
Not at the elite level typically because they want to get out and play. I mean, Texas is lucky right now in that Trey Owens is a true freshman. So we'll see how that all goes. I hear what you're saying. I would say this, if Georgia right now had a quarterback playing at a higher level, they'd look pretty darn unbeatable to me. But they don't have a quarterback playing at a high level.
No.
So, all right, that's going to do it for this episode of Rapid Reactions. Again, wish to thank our sponsor, Adam Lowy, over at the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, please visit Adam at loweylawfirm.com. He's there to help you and yours. All right, guys, big week ahead for the Longhorns. As we mentioned earlier, Texas hosts Florida. We'll see you again later today. We've got a couple other things coming. And then we got the live stream tonight at 7 o'clock. For CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. Hook 'em.